Live, Peg.
We are live.
Long time coming. This has been an idea for, I don't know, a couple of years now. This is the first ever episode of, wait for it, season one, episode one, college, with Matt Carpenter and Peg Keough. Um, yeah, so welcome everybody. This is fun for us. I mean, this is something again, like I'm not exaggerating there. We've been dragging our feet forever, had to break ground somewhere, and tossed and turned on some names as well. But we were here to talk about college, so we just kind of boiled it down and kept it simple, and we'll see where that takes us. Again, my name is Matt Carpenter, just north of Boston. I live in Beverly, Mass. We have an office in Salem, Mass, and what we do is talk about college all day, every day in our professional lives, which bleeds into our personal lives. We're going to do that here. That's kind of our intention. And I think oftentimes when we're educating families about how this process works, we're really focused on the X's and O's and don't talk as much about the emotional component of this process. And I think we're going to kind of do the inverse relationship to that with this podcast is kind of our goal here. And I always love talking to my buddy, Peg. I'm excited to learn who we call the fairy godmother of financial aid. She's a Jersey girl living out in Seattle. And Peggy, why don't you introduce yourself and we'll see where it takes us.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. That's like one of the major way that I describe myself. Yeah, I grew up in Jersey, love Springsteen. And yeah, we started thinking about this, and we are experts in this field, but there's so much more to all of this than understanding what everything means and what the colleges are doing, and it's money, it's your kids. Matt says this all the time. I say it. It's like this perfect storm of emotions. And it's a process that has become so crazy. And it really doesn't have to be. It should be a process you're going through with your kids, getting them ready for the next chapter. That's what, when our kids pop out, that's the whole deal. How are we going to give them wings to be on their own? And I know college, they're not totally on their own. They're not paying all their bills, most kids at least. So it's a half step to that point. And yeah, we're just hoping on this podcast, the idea is for us to just be chatting, that this can be a complement to what we do on the more expert source of truth for all the college financial planning. That'll come into it a little, but just the emotional side of this, it's hugely emotional, right? And just for people in an intro, like, I have two kids, Shannon and Brennan. I'm going to date myself and be totally open here. They're 31 years old, twins, obviously. So I'm beyond this, but you just won't forget. Yeah, don't forget it. I'll never forget when I dropped each of them off. It was very different. And we'll probably talk about that on one of these podcasts, right? Very different schools, very different drop-offs. But you want to make the most of this time when you have your kids and not have it all be stress and frustration. And it's hard because the process is convoluted, and they've got stuff coming from their friends and their high school and the media, and it's just a lot. So we want to just show up and keep having our mantras for you to help you get through the emotional side as well as that other side of understanding how it all works.
Yeah, and we thought it might be helpful and it'll be interesting for us, right? Because Peg and I, we know each other well, and again, together every day for the last few years, and have I think, a superficial understanding of what one another's experience were when we were going off to college, right? But we thought it might be helpful to just kind of bring it into our homes, go back in time a little bit, right? We'll probably both, I don't know, remember some things that we had forgotten about here, and just talk about how how the whole college experience played out in each of our homes, right? And what was money a part of the conversation? Was there an expectation of going to college? So, because there's not really a playbook on, like, when do we have these conversations with our kids? How do we have it? What are the, yeses and nos, and what should we be doing? And not that there is any perfect answers there, but we can just kind of share some insight from our perspective and just kind of talk you through what we thought was good, maybe what we would change. And Peggy, if you're all right with it, maybe I'll ask you a few things first, if you'll allow it.
Absolutely.
All right. So I know, again, all you can tell me what's right and wrong here. So I know your dad was a college professor, right?
He was a college professor, but then he left Notre Dame, go Irish. And we moved to New Jersey, and he was an accounting philosophy minor. And then he ended up at Price Waterhouse at the time. And then he was a partner at Price Waterhouse. So he was academic, taught at Duke, Notre Dame, and then ended up in Manhattan working for Price Waterhouse. But yeah, if
And
you
what about
asked
your
him who he
mom?
was, he would say he was an educator. Yeah.
Okay. And did your mom, did she work or was she home with you guys? What did you
Yeah,
know?
she was an OR nurse.
Okay.
Yeah, she stopped working for a while when we were younger, and then she went back to nursing when my youngest sister got a little bit older. But yeah, she's a nurse by background.
Okay. Because my thesis is, and again, you can tell me where I'm right and wrong here, that just given your dad's background specifically, and it sounds like your mom went to college too, that it was just like a given that you kids were going to go to college and that was a expectation. And, but I don't know. Tell me if that's
Yeah, education was just always from when I was teeny tiny. Everything was a lesson, everything was learning with my dad. It's just the way he was. So, love of learning was his thing. And so, yeah, it was never really talked about like, are you going to go to college? Now, if one of us, because I'm one of four, I have two sisters and a brother, if one of us like struggled in high school and we were like, we want to do this or that, my parents would have been open to that. It would have been, make the world a better place, however that is for you, go for it and do it. We just all happened to be kids that college was a good next step. Yeah. And that was just kind of what it was, right? We all were going to college and then we all did. So, but it
and I
was more the
know
an extension of learning.
okay. And then I know you at least graduated from New Providence High School, which is at least since I've been familiar with it, so call it 20 years, has just had a reputation as like one of the best public school districts in New Jersey. I don't know if it was like that when you were going to school, but do you know if that was part of the draw for them? Was it that that it had a great reputation, or was that just
No, I mean, when we moved there, my dad was on sabbatical for 2 years from Notre Dame. We were going back. And then a lot of stuff, happened and he just ended up staying. And so they actually looked at moving and then we ended up just staying where we were in the New York metropolitan area. I'm sure they looked at schools, but I was in second grade. So I don't think they were looking at the high school. And honestly, when I was there, the high school was fine. But since I've grown up, the high school ended up being like you're referencing, like high up in the state. It wasn't when I was a kid. Actually, my youngest sister, my parents pulled her and she went to private school because they were like, the high school's just not great anymore. It wasn't more reputation because my parents weren't those kind of people, but it was just more, we don't know that the education is as good. But then there were issues at the private school, so she went right back to the public school. So long story, it was good, but it wasn't like, oh, it's number one in the state like it was for a while. That's why we're going to move to this town. It wasn't, no, it wasn't like that. But when they were number one in the state, just funny sidebar, my youngest sister's boyfriend was the principal during that whole time. So that was kind of fun. But yeah, they grew to this, top district
okay?
way after I was gone. So
And just remind me, what's the order with you and your siblings?
there's my brother, and then we're Irish twins, so about a year between us. And then there's my sister, about 2.5 years, and then my youngest sister, who I always forget how old she is, like
Okay.
7 years younger, something like that.
And where'd your brother go to college?
Notre Dame.
Okay, so he was Notre Dame. You were next, and did you have what were your ambitions? Were you was it Ivy or bust type of deal or Notre Dame? Were you super
No, I'm going to share some stuff you probably don't even know about me, Carl. So when I was a kid in high school, I decided because I love being outside, and I said to my dad, I want to be a farmer. I love being outside. And he's like, what? You're like this Jersey kid. He goes, all right. I think he thought like, yeah, right. So he sent me the summer after my sophomore year in high school, one of his nieces. So like my cousin was married to a farmer, much older cousin, and they had a farm with his dad in Indiana. So he's like, well, you can go and work on their farm and see how you like it. And it was like for 2 weeks. I went out there, loved it. The next summer, they invited me back and they're like, we want to hire you to be a farmhand. So I stayed there the whole summer. So I was like, all right, I'm going to be a farmer. I'm going to go to college for agriculture, and we'll talk on other podcasts about my decision tree and things I should have done differently. But anyways, at this point, I'm like, and my parents were
Now's
like,
as good time as
she
any if
loves
you want.
it. Yeah, she loves it. So I just started looking at ag schools, which are the ag schools are typically the big state schools, right? So I was looking at, Purdue, Clemson, Wisconsin, like all of these big schools. There was no like rankings, prestige with my parents. They just weren't like that. The
And you didn't care either.
appearances, what?
You didn't care either. It wasn't a big deal for you
No,
either.
no, it just wasn't a thing we grew up with at all. My parents just weren't into doing stuff for that. That just wasn't their thing. And and then pretty far into it, I realized, oh, which I should have realized right away, Cornell has the best ag program. So I was like, well, first I got to apply there. It's the best program. It had nothing to do with being an Ivy. And this is literally what my parents said to me. We're not taking you to visit. It's a 4-hour drive, mind you, because you're never going to get in. There's no way you're going to get in. We're not wasting our time. But if you want to try, go ahead. So I was like, fine, I'll do it. Did it. Not a lot of stress or anything. Lo and behold, I get in. My parents were like, okay, I guess we have to go visit now since you got in. And then, I mean, my decision tree, the way I think was, well, I got to give myself the ultimate challenge. If this is the best ag school and I got in, I should go there. And I actually was all ready to go to University of Wisconsin-Madison. Just thought it was the greatest place in the world. That's where I would have ended up if it wasn't for Cornell. I loved Cornell. Was that the best decision? Who knows? But literally, Carp, people in my high school were pissed. They're like, you got in there and I didn't, because I didn't I had a good GPA, but I wasn't a brainy kid, right? And they were more brainy and they had way better SAT scores. But I was like, sorry, dude.
You remember?
You
You
know,
remember your SAT score? Do you
oh
remember
yeah,
it?
I will tell you my best combination. And when I told my husband Bill, he was like, "Oh my God, you were dumb." But my best combination super scoring was like 510, 580, which I'm sure all the parents listening right now are like, should I just click off on this podcast? This girl is done, right? But look what I did. I started a business. Like, this is a great lesson that the Ivies really do look at the whole package. And I found out later, like the woman that interviewed me, she was like, you have your, you know what, together.
Hey,
You
Peggy, you're on
wanted
a
to do
you're on a-
something, you went and did it, it was all that kind of thing. But that's what happened. So I didn't live in a household where my parents were like, they were just like, no, you're never getting in there. You don't have the stats. Like, but all right, we'll pay for you to apply, but we're not even going to waste our time to go. So that was the chronology of the whole thing. And that's the only reason why, one of those name brand schools even ended up on my list. It was because of the ag school. All the other schools were the really strong state schools that had great ag programs.
Yeah, it's interesting because you would think that I know you did play a sport there, which I want to ask you about after, but it's almost like you had a great resume for what they were looking for, right? You're going to the agriculture school and you had a really strong resume for that because you had lived it, right? For 2 summers, which was probably relatively unique for, kind of a city girl, right?
Yeah, yeah,
From
yeah.
Jersey, you just put yourself in it, right? You went all the way in there. Um, that's cool. And then because I know you played tennis at Cornell, was that a part of it at all? Were you competitive in high school at tennis, or was that just, did you walk on there?
Yeah,
Like,
I was a 4-year varsity tennis player. So yeah, that was my sport. First it was basketball and then it ended up being tennis. But yeah, I played all 4 years varsity and I wasn't recruited by Cornell. Like, it wasn't like that. And I went actually freshman year, didn't make it. And then I went in the summer after my freshman year at Cornell and paid out of my own pocket to train down in Florida at this like all day training center called Harry Hopman. And then went back sophomore year and tried out and made it. So then I played, I played tennis at Cornell, but that wasn't part of, oh, we want her because of tennis. I wasn't on their radar at all with
Okay.
that. But I would say too, like I was that. I was the captain of the team 2 years. I was MVP. I was in plays and had leading roles, but these weren't things I did to get into college. This was just Peg being Peg. And that's really important, like not to try and choreograph your life to get into a Cornell or whatever your dream school is, Cornell College in Iowa, whatever your dream. Be who you are and it'll just all work out. And that's just what happened with me. And it was just, I was just this happy-go-lucky kid. I got into Cornell. And honestly, when I got there, I realized very quickly, like, wow, I'm not as book smart as these kids. So I gotta get my act together, right? I was a smart person, but that level of intellectualism, I had to go up a notch, which was good for me. It was good for me, but
Yeah.
um,
It
different
reminds me
environment.
of what the I'm forgetting her name at the moment, but she was an admissions person at Yale, but specifically on the committee for deciding who gets in, who gets out. And she said something to the effect of we look for kids that are not trying to get in here, right? And that's what she kind of
Yeah.
meant, like of like, oh, and I think they're unbelievably savvy at figuring out, okay, did this kid just put a bazillion extracurriculars on there because they think it'll help them get into Yale? Or are they actually incredibly passionate about what they are doing? And like they go and find those kids that are just like authentically into what they're into and they go all in on that, whatever it might be. Right. So I think you check that box for them. Now I get a question for you, Peggy, that I'm doing some reverse engineering here. I'm like, okay, dad's at this big CPA firm in Manhattan, tennis academy. Were you a Richie, Peggy? Did you grow up a Richie?
We had, we, I didn't want, but I wouldn't say that. I mean, let's face it, both you and I are very, and if you look at the
Lucky.
world, we're both super richies, right? If you look at the country, we probably are too. I mean, the atmosphere in my house was not, none of us were spoiled. Money wasn't flowing. I didn't get a car when I was driving at the age of 17, none of that kind of stuff. My parents saved and invested in our college education. They saved for that. So, I mean, we had food on the table, we were taken care of, but I quite often was told, no, we're not buying that. That's expensive. That was a common theme, or save your own money and you can buy that for yourself, that kind of thing. So,
Man, I'm surprised you come across as a snob, but
oh, thank you. That's lovely.
but I have a real place that I'm going there because just curious if you have any memories of, and I do know what the college was not as insane as it is today, obviously, cost wise. But was that a part of the conversation? Was that a or not? Right? Just talk about that piece a little bit. Whatever you remember. I'd just be curious.
Yeah, my parents didn't sit us down and say, this is what's affordable. My dad said, you can apply where you want. You have to justify. And I remember him saying, don't tell me you want to go to like Pepperdine. Not that Pepperdine's a bad school, just because you want to be down, on the shore. That's not going to be a good enough reason. And he just picked that out because it's in a beautiful setting. Um, but my parents didn't share this with me, but as I've gotten older, my mom was like, when my grandmother died, my dad got a little bit of money and not going to get into, because I'm a financial planner by background, but when they invested the money, the interest rates were super high and they did very well buying bonds, which my mother did. So we all had money. But my mom has told me, since it was like a couple years ago, she said, I'll just do a little thing about Cornell. Cornell is unique in the Ivies in many ways, in my opinion, but one of them is there's state schools at Cornell, and then there's private schools. The ag school is a state school, so that meant it's like a state school. They got creme de la creme New York kids, and then I could come as like an out-of-state kid. That was cheaper than the College of Arts and Sciences. And my mom said, if you were trying to get into one of those, we wouldn't have paid for it because it was way more expensive than the ag school. But they never said that to me when I was a kid. But if that was the case, they would have said, no, we're not going to pay for that. I mean, because I heard, like I just said, I heard that all the time around, we live within our means, we're not doing that, blah, blah, blah. So it wasn't just a Richie, to use your term, Garb, like, you can go anywhere, little
Yeah, no
princess.
problem.
It wasn't like that at all, and my mom said the ag school was the same as Notre Dame. And I'm 60 years old. I'll just say it. So school was like,
Yeah.
compared to what my dad was making, compared to our listeners and what they make annually gross and what you're expected to pay for college sticker price, not order of magnitude isn't even in the same universe anymore. So it was completely different back then as far as what could possibly be affordable, but there were definitely, they had conversations between them, my mom and dad, like, she said we wouldn't have paid for arts and sciences. The private schools were way too expensive for
Got it.
us.
Oh, it makes, and then where'd your younger two sisters end up?
Notre Dame, everybody, I'm the black sheep.
Oh, Peggy, just poor.
I tell everybody somebody had to go to school for academics and not just football. So what
That's
can
right.
I say?
You
Notre Dame
just
was not, love Notre Dame, love the football, wasn't a place for me. That's a whole nother podcast conversation. But
yeah, yeah.
anyways, yeah, everybody else, they're all domers except for me.
And you met Bill at Cornell, right? Did you meet Bill at
Yeah,
Cornell?
met my husband right one of the first few days at Cornell. Yeah.
Really? No kidding. And so were you guys together right away?
That's a long story.
Tell it. Tell
We
it.
were together starting second semester.
Who approached
Because
who? Who approached who first?
he approached, well, like my roommate, and back then my random roommate was from Bethesda, Maryland, and he came from Maryland. He grew up in Westchester County, but his parents moved when he was a senior in high school down to the DC area. So my roommate had met him at like hey, we're going to Cornell soon, rah rah event down in DC. And so she saw him at this event. She goes, oh, I know him. I met him back at home. So that's how we came up to him and talked to him. And he was more with me wanting to date. And I was like, yeah, what all guys don't want to hear. I'm like, I just want to be friends. And I told him that. So then he blew me off, of course. I'd see him here or there and he blew me off. But when it came to the beginning of second semester, I was like, yeah, I do kind of like him. So I Cornell rushes for sororities and frats January of the year. And so I rushed and got into a house and had a pledge night or whatever. So I asked him, and then so that kind of opened the door again. And then we were on and off dating. We didn't date.
Last time what? You said, all right, I'll take you up on that offer from first
I
semester.
just was like, oh, do you want to go? Like some of my guy friends were like, you're just gonna have to eat crow, because I had said I just wanted to be friends. But he said yes. So and then we started dating. And that was like on and off throughout our 4 years, like not consistently, but yeah. So
All right. Well, that's fun. I don't know. Any bows you want to put on your college experience or the process of, going off to school? Anything else you would add?
um
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, it sounds like really you had like a really healthy, uh, almost maybe you're the textbook, Peggy. Maybe you're the maybe you're the playbook because it sounds like it was like a really as healthy as it can be conversations that you guys were having at home and stuff like
yeah.
that. I mean,
There
any.
was yeah, that we didn't have stress. My dad, who worked a lot, he was the one that took me everywhere except for Penn State. I remember I went with my best friend and my mom took us and we just drove and we literally filled out the application in the back seat coming home. And then back then you just put it in the mailbox, right? That's literally like there wasn't all this stress. Maybe some other families had it around you. All our friends. I don't know. I don't know. Like none of my friends were doing it. And it just, we didn't have that. And so I feel for kids now. But yeah, in my house, it was just always do your best. And if your best was a B, and you got a B, but my brother's best is an A. He needed to get an A. It wasn't about status. It was just my dad would say, you know, do the best with what God gave you. That was his thing, and that's what you should be doing. And that was our expectation, but it wasn't about going to Notre Dame or Cornell or XYZ school. It wasn't about that at all, you know?
No, it's nice. I mean, that's nice, and then that's uh, and I do think part of it, and you said this, is that just like it sounds like a lot of your peers and friends had kind of a similar experience, and just the fact that you're, doing the applications in the back of a car, and it's like that's just not a thing anymore, right? In terms of how much of a pressure
Yeah.
cooker it is now, and like how many schools you got to apply to, and how challenging the process is. So I think part of that is families today have it harder than we did. I was probably an iteration harder than you, right? And I'm very confident and that was, over 20 years ago. I'm very confident now it's a whole another interval harder than it was, and more pressure packed than when I was applying to school. However,
Parents? Yeah,
yeah.
go ahead. Go ahead. And
Well, I
then
was
I'll
gonna say,
say,
however, the kind of like it sounds like a lot of like the core principles, values, etc., that you experienced and your family kind of had in place would still be very helpful today, right? Even if
yeah,
even
and that's what I was going to say. Parents can take their house and say, this is how I want to raise my kids. These are the values I want them to have. These are the ways I want them to be able to show up in the world. And it doesn't really matter what's going on out there. Yeah, it's going to be there. And the minute they go off to kindergarten, it all starts. But I did it with my two. It was constantly like, no, we're not doing that. No, that's not, and it just, you beat it into their heads. They're going to fight you. It's just, but it's not like, oh, I don't have control. It's just crazy and nutty. I have to be part of this. No, you can be a certain force in your home and it will sink in with your kids. It will, maybe even not when they're there. Remember, we were talking to my son at Indiana University and we had him on speaker and he was like, thanks so much for teaching me some of the stuff you did. I can't believe some of these kids, like they're not preparing and then they're not getting the grades they need to get into the business school. And we just kind of gave each other a thumbs up, like finally we hear something for all those years of trying to instill certain things in them. So it wasn't until he was like off on his own that some of it was kind of landing like, wow, I do this because my parents taught me to show up this way. So I'm just saying to parents, like, you're not at the mercy of the craziness. The craziness is there, but you can set the stage in your house for how you want things to be looked at, and what's best for your kids.
Yeah, and again, it's like I think it's harder to overcome now, right? Because you are fighting against so many societal challenges, but you have some agency, right?
Yeah, but I would say that I'm calling BS on that one, Carpy.
Okay.
Anytime, I'm telling you, you can, it's always, things are always hard, right? But you just show up the way and you're on the hot seat now, right? So you've got Emma's how old? 9,
She's 10. She's turned 10.
10. Okay.
Second.
Yeah. So just so our listeners know, so I have 2 done. He's in the building up stages, right? So it's kind of fun because you're in a different part of the way different than I am, right?
No
I've
doubt about it.
sunsetted.
And
Yeah.
when I'm
So
big,
all this stuff I'm sharing, I hope you're like taking a lot of notes there, buddy, because I'm going to be helping you as well as my listeners.
I'm telling you, I am and I do. I try to be a sponge, right? Hopefully part of the advantage of being in this profession my entire career is just being a fly on the wall for all these different family dynamics to try to pull from and try to pull what I think is good and I want to have an intention to aim for, right? But again, just
Yeah.
easier said than done. And I will double down on the fact that I think it's harder today with just what you're up against societally. It doesn't mean you can't do it. I just think it's a bigger challenge. I think it's a bigger hill to climb. And I think also, Peggy, and what I'm thinking is we'll we will this one is going to kind of be your episode
Okay.
or whatever,
All
so to
right.
speak. And then, but here's where I think we're ultimately going to land. Yours is going to be closer to here's what you want to strive towards. I think mine's going to be closer to the other end of the spectrum. Not that it was a disaster by any stretch, but I think I'm going to have some more. I would have done this differently. I would have done this differently. I would have done this differently. And I think my parents would kind of say the same. Maybe part of that is because I was the oldest and there wasn't a I was the first try, right? So, but
Right.
anyway,
So we're always learning, right? You're always learning as a parent, and so yeah, I'm sure that's part of it. Well, that's a good idea.
yeah,
We'll concentrate on you next time. But yeah, I
I'll
will
be on.
say, yeah, that it again, like I said at the beginning, it doesn't have to be so hard. So hopefully, well, I'm not going to say hopefully in this podcast, I know you're going to get these tidbits throughout our conversations where it's like, "Oh, that's landing for me. I'm going to implement that today, or I'm going to approach things a little differently starting today." And I mean, it'll help you as a parent, it'll help you with your relationship potentially with your spouse, if that's applicable, and your spouse or partner, and then with your kids, right? And you might not see it with your kids right away. It might be later, but it's like a constant journey when you're a parent. It just is. And this is just another chapter of parenting when they get into this going away, going away phase.
All right, all right, Peggy. Well, thanks for being such an open book. And yeah, my turn next.
Yeah, yeah. All right, everybody. We'll talk to you the next time.